Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and with me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, also host of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. Well, today we want to focus on the subject we don't talk about that often, and that's the European Union. A little while ago, the European Union tried to pass a $1.4 trillion budget and a 740 euro coronavirus emergency package. The budget was vetoed by two EU member states, Hungary and Poland. And in response, George Soros, who is a very strong opponent, to put it politely, of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, penned an article in Project Syndicate, which he funds himself, in which he urges the EU not to let up in its pressure on Hungary and Poland. The reason Hungary and Poland had vetoed the budget was that the money would be available conditional on what they call rule of law issues. Of course, that's left very vague. Rule of law is a kind of EU version of the topic we talked about the other day, the rules-based order, which means nothing very much, sounds something very good, but you can pretty much just stuff any content in it that you like. In the case of Hungary and Poland, what they objected to was that this was a mechanism for the EU to interfere in their own internal affairs, which was clearly in violation of the treaties of accession, which was basically sovereign member states. Soros jumped in and said, yeah, absolutely, you've got to maintain this rule of law conditionality because Orban is the most horrible dictator imaginable.
Yeah, he keeps getting elected though, right?
Exactly. Okay.
Except
occasionally when they have elections, such as recently in the Budapest local government, Orban's people lost. And of course, there was much rejoicing, but then you think, well, if he's a totalitarian dictator, how come his party lost the local elections? Sorry? Yeah, exactly.
How did he lose then?
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same thing we hear in the case of Russia as well. Putin, totalitarian dictator, except of course when he loses some local election, and then suddenly it's rejoicing. But anyway, in response to Orban's article, to Soros's article, Orban himself wrote an article on his government website in which he called Soros an economic criminal and the most corrupt person in the world because he basically bankrolls politicians, lawyers, judges, think tanks, just about everybody in order to propagate his weird agenda, which is always a kind of a mystery. He calls it the open society, but from everything we know of Soros, he is not in any way an advocate of an open society. So this is, where we are, where we have Soros, a billionaire, but who bankrolls, just about everybody, is instructing the European Union to essentially violate its own treaties, to interfere in the internal affairs of a sovereign member state against a politician who has been elected time and time again, while he, Soros, has never once in his life run for elective office. All right, what's your take, Peter?
Well, first of all, Karl Popper wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies, and it's a really brilliant book, and I really wish George Soros would change the name of his foundation because it's antithetical to what Karl Popper wrote. It's one of the greatest political tracts of all time. It's very controversial, even to this day. What I find interesting is that obviously this is targeting the two populist governments, Poland and Hungary, and using these budgets. George, you know a little bit about history, so do I. Europe produced a lot of really great diplomats in its history, Metternich, Talleyrand, Bismarck. Who's running this show in Brussels. Okay, so you're going to put the entire union at stake here, the whole ball of wax, and plus Corona a rescue package on top of it, because you don't like Orban and Kuczynski. I mean, what kind of maturity is that? Okay. I mean, for me, that's just really nonsense. I mean, I guess these things aren't that important. You need to score some political points here. And that's what they're doing. And what they're sending is a message, because the populist wave is ongoing, and it's going to pick up in intensity. And this is a preemptive attack to make sure, we can take down the two big ones right now. Don't you think about it. Don't you think about it. Okay, but this is what this is. And it's really transparent, okay, and it's ineffective, and and really what it does is that it sends a message all through the union, is that if you try to protect your sovereignty, you will be punished. We will find you, okay? And so for me, this political gambit is just absolutely ridiculous at the worst possible time. Kaczynski and Orban are democratically elected, okay? And that's the bottom line. If either you accept that or you don't, okay? And so it shows to me again. I mean, when Angela Merkel opened the gates in 2015, who gave her the right to do that for the European Union? Who gave her the right to determine who would have quotas of this and this? Yes. Oh, no, it's because, that's a strong country, okay? All these, rule of law stuff is all nonsense, because when the rubber hits the road, you have the power to do it, okay? And that's what it's all about.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And of course, it does go down to the subject of immigration, because that's what really brought Orban into serious confrontation with the EU. And in particular with George Soros, who has always been an advocate for open borders, should we say. And he leapt on what happened in 2015 to declare that the EU must accept, that's his use of the term, 1 million refugees or migrants a year. He just decided it, that they should accept 1 million a year. No one in the EU, not even in Germany, wanted anything like that. But Soros thought that this was in keeping with his open society ideas, and so he instructed the EU to do this. Merkel, of course, sort of really, when she opened the floodgates, had no mandate from the German people. So she naturally said that every other country should take some of these migrants, and they said no. You open the floodgates, you take them, you keep them, and ever since then, I think Orban has been in the crosshairs of Brussels, because he point blank says we're not taking any. And the same position is also taken by Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. So this is a total violation of democratic norms. So, again, you're talking about an open society when you're disdaining the very foundation of society, which is you respect the popular wishes of the people who are members of that society. But, this is clearly not in keeping with the Soros agenda.
But the Soros agenda, at least in this particular way, highlights very clearly the issue of sovereignty within the European Union, and it's not resolved. It's not resolved at all. And Orban and Kaczynski are showing that this isn't resolved. I mean, they are elected by their own constituents, and they're held responsible, account to them. And Kaczynski and Orban are very, very smart, because that's where they have their power from. It doesn't come from Brussels, okay? And again, this wild card, George Soros, why he should be calling the shots, okay? Oh, of course, he's got really, obviously, very deep pockets. I mean, his tentacles reach deep into the United States, even down to district judges and things like this, okay? I mean, for me, it's really quite maniacal. There's nothing democratic about that. And when he spent the last 3.5 years talking about foreign meddling in elections, so I mean, this is meddling all over, okay? But it's not seen that way, is because of the ideological tilt that he has right here. But people like Soros give democracy a bad name if you do things because it's a ideologically right thing to do. I mean, this is, and people are taking it back. People are saying, no, they reject this. It's one of the things that we saw in the 2020 general election in the United States. I mean, everybody is just laser focused on Trump, 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 Trump. Okay. But no, this was, I wouldn't call it a red wave, but it was a pretty strong a ripple. Okay. And it was a rejection of this Soros agenda, a complete rejection of it here. And no one wants to admit that. I mean, Nancy Pelosi decides she's going to be speaker again. No, I can't think in history when a party gets a shellacking like that, and the speaker says, "Oh, we did great. We have a mandate." Okay,
right.
No,
Yes.
and it's even worse in the case of Soros, because as you took the punchline right away from me, because I was about to say, "And who elected George Soros?" But you said that the first part of your question to me. And so it highlights what democracy is to what people and towards what means. Okay, democracy, the idea of democracy for people like Soros and people that take his money, okay, is that our ideology is superior and we'll use any means necessary to get to power because we're virtuously more better and morally better than the people that are against us. I mean, it's a very insidious way of looking at the world because you never can be wrong until it completely collapses into chaos.
Right, exactly. And of course, when Orban talks about the Soros network, he's of course hitting on something very important because we talk a lot about our campaign finance or the corporations who give money to political campaigns and that buys them television advertising. So we're all familiar with this. But the Soros network is something very different. He puts a lot of people on the payroll. And that is the most effective way of influencing politics, not by buying television advertising. It's questionable how much influence it has. But if you buy people, you buy a judge, you buy a lawyer, you buy a think tank, you buy a newspaper, you buy a journalist, then you've got an entire network of people who are ready to spread that message. And then it becomes an echo chamber that other media outlets pick up. And then people in the European Union, the politicians in the European Parliament, all of whom are also on the Soros payroll, then echo and so on. And so suddenly we have this the demonization of Orban, who, much like Trump, is a populist. I mean, and that is an anathema to the characters who run the EU and the characters who increasingly run the United States. We do not want essentially populist people who are, essentially express the wishes of the people that they represent.
And it's even worse than that because you can't criticize George Soros, apparently. Okay. I mean, what I've heard that's called anti-Semitism. They throw that card out there. Okay.
That's exactly right.
I mean, we've talked about it before. I think it was on Fox News. One of the presenters, Soros was.
And remember who was silent?
Whoa!
Yeah, that's right. And what was interesting about that was that the person silenced was Newt Gingrich. Now, Gingrich is a very substantial political figure. He's been around for decades. He is former Speaker of the House. He was told to shut up by a journalist. Don't bring up Soros. I mean, can you imagine that? You're telling a former speaker to shut up and don't bring up the subject of Soros?
Yeah, and that's what makes our politics poison, because as you're absolutely right. I mean, money is one thing in politics, but if you're buying people, if you have an HR policy when it comes to meddling, that's far more insidious and damaging. And the word network is so appropriate because these people work with other people to deliver the message from a variety of different fronts. And so, but you know what this does, George, is that again, the ineptitude of the EU. I'm just appalled on some of their stratagems. Okay, because what they've done is they've just only inflated Orban in all of this. He's come out on top. Okay, because he's the underdog. You're constantly beating up on him. You're trying to tell him how to run his country after he's elected over and over again. And for Soros to claim Orban is corrupt, well, I don't know the details of that, so I can't comment on it. But is the EU corrupt? I think we can say it's pretty corrupt, okay? And we know who it works for, all right? So, I mean, I think, when someone, it's always true. When you accuse somebody of something, it's what you're probably doing yourself.
That's exactly right. And it's always when you make this whole thing of, oh, corruption, this is simply a mechanism to, insidiously insert yourself into the internal affairs of a country. It's like, like humanitarian crisis, that when we had the humanitarian intervention. Oh, there's some, you invent a humanitarian crisis. Oh, now we need to intervene. So now you invent corruption. Oh, we've got to step in because the rule of law is violated. And again, you can easily do it.
Even though it's illegal to do the intervention itself, okay, but they do it and they do because of the rule of law. I mean, it's absolutely absurd.
That's it, and that's exactly right. And how do they get around it? You say when you said the illegal intervention, well, they get around it well because again, the rules-based order, or we sometimes have to do something that is morally right but not necessarily legal. Which is how they justified all of their interventions, like Yugoslavia, Iraq as well, was not legal. But you can always justify it by saying, well, we did the right thing, even if it's not actually in accordance with the law.
After all, something must be done. That is not a policy. That's a reaction with no legal basis whatsoever. Something must be done. I mean, and I think for us, for you and I both personally, that mantra started with the illegal breakup of Yugoslavia.
That's right. Exactly. So they invented a humanitarian crisis that didn't exist. And again, Soros played an very active role in all of that. Again, you whip it up and the newspapers keep reporting entirely fictional humanitarian crisis. That serves to justify military intervention. And then when it turns out there was no humanitarian crisis, it's already too late to make any difference, like the weapons of mass destruction, when we find there weren't any, too late to make any difference. But and then when you say, well, how do you justify it? I mean, you had no Security Council resolution support it. Well, we had to do the right thing. That's the responsibility to protect, which came into vogue a little bit later.
I got I can feel it in my bones on this chilly evening in Moscow. I can feel it in my bones, that's what the Biden administration, if it comes into power, that's going to be their justification. Something simply must be done.
No question. That's it. That's exactly it. I mean, that's the mentality of the people who are there.
Because they don't have arguments. Right. Because they don't have arguments.
Of course not. Of course not. And because the only people who might oppose it are you'd have to say the Republicans or conservatives, but the problem is they'd have no time for international law either. They hate the United Nations as well, so they can't really very well then turn around and say you're in violation of the United Nations since they don't believe it. So yes, basically you get a blank check.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've been watching some contributors on Fox News dealing with a potential Biden administration cabinet, and specifically focused on National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, and Defense Secretary. And they tie themselves up in knots because they can't renege on interventionism, but they compliment the president, not getting us into wars. They don't know. They won't say anything on Syria because they don't know what is our position.
Right,
See,
exactly.
it's all scrambled up because it's still an American exceptionalism approach. But when you put Trump into the prism, the light starts breaking in different directions and people start squirming because they know that it doesn't make any sense, okay? The more you think about it, it doesn't make any sense.
No, that's exactly. And what often happens when these Fox News crowd comes along is that what's their criticism of the Biden team? Well, they're going to be soft on Iran, they're going to be soft on Syria, they're going to be soft on Russia, they're going to be soft on China. So that's the critique. That hey, what about more interventionism? Get us into more confrontations. So that's really the mentality, which means that when the next intervention caper comes along, maybe Ethiopia, who knows what is going to be. There's going to be very little criticism. Maybe Rand Paul might say something. That's about it. You just get it. You just get a blank check.
Yeah, the uniparty, when it comes to foreign policy, is in power fully right now. And for people that are following the gaggle and follow me on crosstalk, is that never confuse conservatives with the GOP, because I have nothing in common with the Tom Cottons and the Lindsey Grahams and all the rest of those warmongers. Okay, I find for me it's very, very painful, because they disgrace what conservatism is. Conservatism has nothing to do with forcefully changing the lives of others at a whim without justification. So I want everyone to know that we stay here on this venue. We stay very clear, okay? We don't look at it through a Democrat and Republican prism, because that's a fool's errand.
Yeah, that's right. And what's interesting about that is that just like the Democrats attacked Trump for the few good things that he did. So the Democrats attacked Trump for trying to improve relations with Russia. Democrats attacked Trump for trying to work out some kind of an agreement with North Korea. So now we can see that, when the Republicans, what they like about Trump are actually the things that Trump actually did that was wrong. They like the fact that he walked away from the JCPOA. They like the fact that he's basically just told the Palestinians to, get lost. Like, we're not interested in you. All of the things that he did wrong, the Republicans like. All the things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Biden administration is going to have a really difficult way to. It's going to be walking on a tightrope, because the whole issue of Iran is obviously front and center all over again. And the Democrats have the squad and more progressives in the party that don't toe the line of towards Israel as the mainstream does. So it's going to be a bit prickly on these issues here. Okay, I have to wonder though, since we've mentioned it so many times, will we be worrying about the Kurds again? I wonder.
I am sure we will, because I'm sure that the Biden administration will get involved in Syria. And how do you get involved? Well, you bring up the Kurds. That's always that's the good one. Then, of course, you go the humanitarian crisis in Idlib. Wait for that one to rear its ugly head about the babies that are dying in Idlib. I mean, that's the next one. But of course, the Kurds as well. I think that that's what they're going to come up with. And all this silly talk about, Biden is going to return to the JCPOA. He's not going to do it. It's not going to happen. It just like, he's going to be a more balanced in Israel and Palestine. No, he's not.
He's not. No, he's not. They never are. Okay, because the foreign policy blob is just wedded to certain ideas, and they can't, and that's why they hated Trump so much, because they can't understand the world in a different way. And the poverty of that is that the world is constantly changing, and if you don't change the way you don't adapt to how change is coming about, you're going to be left very isolated. And we did this a couple of days ago. They just have this phobia in the back of their mind that if we don't, we have to remain relevant. Why are you saying that? I mean, if that's your fear, okay. Because I would say in the long term, yes, irrelevant, because it's not an international system that serves the real international community, which is essentially everyone except for that's in the transatlantic alliance. Okay, that's the international. I mean, and it's September every year they come up about the Israel-Palestine issue. It's like 98-5 every single year. It's something like, and it's the United States and a couple of island states in the Pacific. Okay.
Right. No, that's right. It's a very funny way of looking at the world. It's like you're looking at it still as if it's the late 19th century. You've got the Europeans, you've got America, and they kind of have a right to rule over the world. We kind of run the world. That's the international community. And you don't say, well, that world's gone. I mean, it's like Iran, it's not the country that was in the 19th century. I mean, it's a regional power. It's a major power. Latin America, Brazil, major power. India is not a part of the British Empire anymore. These are all serious powers now. You can't just rule over them.
this Orientalism is so profoundly part of the fabric of Western foreign policy making. I mean, it's left unsaid most of the time, but and this is coming from liberals and woke corporates and all of this stuff here, but it's lurking in the back of their mind is that China now is essentially at parity with the United States economically. Maybe a little bit ahead in some areas and maybe not others. But this is the first time in 500 years that a non-European power is ascending. And it's something that the white Western liberals can't comprehend. It's why? Because there's a built-in element of racism. It's really an Orientalism on steroids.
I think the thing is that China,
how can you trust these? I mean, how can you trust these people? Which, of course, is a code dog whistle. We get to say it now.
Well, yeah, but the thing is also, I think that China doesn't do as it's told. I mean, Japan was also a major power. But after the 1945, Japan basically had to do what it was told. I mean, you just basically didn't argue because Japan was told, you open your mouth and we're going to bring up World War II. So, you do as you're told. But China that isn't under any of those restrictions. I mean, China says, we were on the right side of the war and we have an absolute right to be a great power.
Well, see, the thing is that so many people don't understand, and I think you'll understand when I say this, is that the Westerners always, because of the rise of the nation state for so many peoples in the 19th century, and of course China is a nation state, but for the Chinese themselves, they think more in terms of their civilization, and I think that's such a different. It's asymmetrical because they think in terms of their presence in the international community, and that's so multifaceted. And they're very self-contained. I mean, you always hear, China's trying to take over the world. No, it's not. It wants the world to come to it under its terms, under historical Han civilization terms, okay? This ridiculous, I mean, when you look at their blue, what is it? Their naval ambitions. It is defensive and protecting of trade routes. Okay, I mean, we don't see I don't see the Chinese having ambitions wanting to secure a port in Cuba. I mean, why? Okay, what would it get them? Nothing. Okay. So I mean, and also, and there's plenty of things to criticize China for, but they don't think they don't think in terms of hegemony like the West does, particularly the United States, because it's hegemony or nothing. It's always zero sum. We have to have complete control, and if we don't have complete control, everything collapses. It's always a calamity.
Right. No, I mean, I think it is always good for the world to have competing power centers.
Yes.
It gives smaller, weaker, more vulnerable countries more freedom. They can operate. They can have. They can do more. They don't have to just obey the diktats of great powers. That was why the post 1992 moment was so terrible for the world, because it didn't look like there was any kind of a rival to the United States. Now that's gone. But that's why, in a way, the Cold War was actually good for small countries, because they were able to maneuver between the two rival superpowers. But the sudden collapse of the USSR meant that you had no means of maneuver.
And so many people don't understand is that, when it's not used very much anymore, and actually now it's more of a disparaging term, but third world. I mean, people think of poverty, but the third world meant a third way. That is the origins of it after the Second World War, during the Cold War, where you could make choices. And if you were a medium-sized power, you could use that to play off different sides to get what you want. That's called diplomacy. That's what empire, states have done in time immemorial, and it's perfectly normal. But see, that is abnormal for the Washington foreign policy blob, because you can only have choices that we provide you, and they're usually false choices, but they might make sugar coated for you, okay? But I mean, and that's why this, when this potential Biden administration with this lineup here just terrifies me because it doesn't work. Okay, it's proven to be a failure, and it's not in the national interest of the average American. And if nothing is going to fundamentally change, we'll wait for 2022 and 2024 when the populist movement is going to roar.
Yeah, and I think just to return to our original subject, I think one target of the Biden administration will be Viktor Orban's Hungary. And that because Tony Blinken, the apparent incoming Secretary of State, has some Hungarian connections. His father was a former ambassador to Hungary in the pre-Orban era. His stepmother is of Hungarian extraction. And even on his maternal side, he has sort of great grandparents who were born in Hungary. He himself is also, part of the Soros network, as is his father, Donald Blinken, also very much part of the Soros network. They are going to target Orban. There's no question about it. And in fact, it may be that speculation that the EU has suddenly got so aggressive now with Orban is in response to, they think they now have the backing of the United States, where Trump really, actually quite liked Orban. So that may be why they're suddenly becoming so aggressive with Hungary. So,
and they said Trump treated allies badly.
Right.
Come on, ridiculous. What has Hungary done to the United States? Oh my goodness. Yeah. What was it? The mouse that roared? What was the name
exactly.
of it?
Yeah. But Orban just rubs liberals the wrong way. Again, the liberals in Europe, he rubs liberals in America the wrong way. I don't know how many columns that was devoted by Paul Krugman, an obsession with Orban. It is very interesting why Americans should be so obsessed. No, a small country that whose language they don't know, or their culture that they know nothing about. But
it's just totalizing ideology. That's what does it. Okay, and Hungary's because Hungary's small, and you can stomp on it, and you can humiliate it, and you can starve it, and because you see when you have with sanctions like with Iran, it doesn't work. Sanctions with Venezuela doesn't work. Sanctions with Russia doesn't work. Certainly some individuals feel the pain, and certainly poor people, particularly in Iran and Venezuela, feel it, okay? Sanctions here in Russia are most of Russians don't even know that there are sanctions against it, okay? But with Hungary, because it is vulnerable, because it is within the Western institutions, you can achieve a victory. And it's like, when you, beat down on someone, when you're more powerful and you beat down people below you, and it's such a primitive, and it's primitive, it's cheap, and it's theatrical. I took care of Urban. What are you going to do? Get a medal?
That's right.
Huh? Are they going to name a street after you or something?
That's right. And you're absolutely right. There is, it's a part of human nature. A sadistic pleasure in bullying somebody who is weaker than you are. And when can you do it in the most satisfying way possible? When you've convinced yourself that this person is morally reprehensible. So not only do you get the pleasure of beating up somebody weaker than you are, you think you're actually serving a higher cause, the good, by doing so. And I think that's clearly the case with Orban.
Well, and that's the toxicity of the neoliberal ideology, okay? It's so totalizing. That's what's so dangerous about it. There's no peaceful coexistence. Everything is existential. Right. That's, and what if there's a mistake, and then everyone pays the price, okay? I mentioned great European diplomats. Yep. They're just a vague memory blowing in the wind now.
Yep. No. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's very funny when you said about the diplomats is that when Helmut Schmidt, I think, made his visit to Moscow, he was already about 95. I think it was his last visit before he died, and he visited obviously Putin, and he said something like, "Well, the problem with Europe, we don't have any statesmen of the kind like Churchill, de Gaulle, Adenauer." And then Putin chimed in, "Don't forget your predecessor, Willy Brandt." And that was kind of interesting because for the Russians, Willy Brandt is a sort of he's one of the great European statesmen, now almost forgotten, but Russians haven't forgotten him.
Yeah, well, they did the establishment did a pretty good job of trying to take him down, take down his legacy. There were informants in his office. Of course, he didn't spend the war inside of Germany. I really tried to take down his legacy, but he was a visionary. He was a total visionary, and he was a politician of a new type during his lifetime and in power. So yeah, I mean, these people, they just denigrate, I mean, that's a high point. That's a high point in the post-war era, and they had to dismantle that.
Right. Now, I thought it's kind of touching that for Russians, he's an important figure. You can say, De Gaulle, Churchill, so on. But Russians, they remember that it was a historic breakthrough when Willy Brandt came and when he fell down on his knees in Poland.
Before we close out, I mean, you live in Hungary. I mean, what is the reaction of the population to the attacks on their prime minister?
Well, I think that again, you have the kind of the people who live in Budapest, the sort of the intelligentsia. They're quite happy with it. They don't like Orban. You go to the rest of the country support him. So, so as far as the people in Budapest are concerned, they're all for it. They doubt that it's going to make very much of a difference because people support Orban. But of course, it's one of these. It's a problem when you have kind of an opposition that relies on outside powers to kind of hoist them into power.
Yeah, I know something about that. Yeah,
exactly. Like you don't like Orban, make your case. Don't rely on Brussels and Merkel or Washington.
Soros.
To do Soros to do the job for you. And I think that's the case again in Hungary and and elsewhere. They think somehow they get pressure from abroad, that's going to get rid of them and they're going to be in power. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, on crosstalk, depending on the crisis, it'd have these Venezuelans that hated the Chavez legacy, and I'd say, well, do you want the United States to invade your country? And then they get all tied up into a pretzel because they really don't know how to answer that question. Okay, right. Yeah, but it shows again. But if you're looking for outside help, I mean, how often does Hungary has regular elections like every other country in Europe, right?
Win an election. That's it. All you have to do, win an election. Yeah,
well, I mean, again, this is this mantra, this ideology. If you lose an election, there's something wrong with the people that voted. It's not the message. Of course, your message can't be mistaken. It can't be wrong. No, then the people failed, and we have to do it again. That's the whole European Union way. If the referendum fails, we have to do it again because the people failed. Okay, that's their really deep-seated conviction in believing in democracy. Okay, it is as ephemeral as vape coming out of this. Okay,
that's right, and that's how they can justify punishing the people. So, I mean, if they cut off Hungary from funds, they say, well, I don't care that it causes suffering in Hungary. They deserved it by voting for Orban. That'll teach them to vote for the right people. So.
Pathetic.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter. And of course, we will be maintaining our laser-like focus on the EU and Hungary and everywhere else in the world. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.